Hello, everyone. My name is Gina Zorzi-Klein. I'm the Chief Program Officer at American Reading Company. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are so lucky to have David Lieben here with us today. And he's going to be talking to us about what makes our core and effective phonics program. Millie from our team will be monitoring the chat. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. And David, thank you, and take it away.
Okay, let me just reiterate what Gina said about questions. Questions always make for better presentations, so please don't hesitate to ask them. We have time, and if they come up on the chat, Millie will stop me and Gina, and we'll address those questions, because it's better to do it on the spot if you can. If there's so many that we're running out of time, then I'll say something to that effect. Let me begin right here by introducing myself. How I got into this position of being a literacy guy was I started a public school, not a charter school, in the early 90s in Harlem, and with my wife. And after a couple of years, we got the lowest reading scores in the city of New York, which you should be impressed by, because there's like 1.2 million children in the New York City school system, 1,000 schools, and we had the lowest scores. It was the zenith of the whole language movement. And the teachers that we hired, and myself and my wife, had more experience with older children. And that was part of it. But nevertheless, getting the lowest scores in the city is impressive. In the process of turning that around, I read a book by Marilyn Adams that some of you may be familiar with, called Beginning to Read. Marilyn is an experimental psychologist who specializes in early reading. And it was clear from reading that book that whole language is not the way the human mind wraps itself around beginning reading. And we changed that to a systematic phonics program, which we're going to talk about today. So we changed 1 into systematic phonics, 2 into growing knowledge, and 3 through growing knowledge, growing vocabulary. All things which American Reading Company's core ELA curriculum does. And I got contacted by the city of New York, and someone working for the chancellor said, would you come and speak to the K-5 or K-8 teachers, principals in the city? And I said, no. I can't do anything in 45 minutes. That person was very stubborn. He came up to our school, and he came up to our apartment and talked about reading and literacy. That was David Coleman, who some of you may know is one of the primary writers of the ELA standards and one of the primary architects, for sure, of the Common Core standards. So I've been working with him, as has my wife, ever since then, which would have been the late 1990s. As soon as David got that task with the standards, he contacted us. I am not a writer of the standards, but I synthesized the research that the standards were based on. And also, Meredith ran a research project to determine what the complexity levels should be with these standards each grade. What's the Lexile or complexity level for 2nd or 3rd grade or 4th grade and so forth. And so right now, if you have to deal with, in the 2nd and 3rd grade, Lexile levels of 420 to 820. That was determined by that research project. And then I became part of Student Achievement Partners, which is a small not-for-profit that was started by the writers of the Common Core standards. And I've been doing a lot of work since then around the country with teachers, with school districts. In the last few years, however, most of my work has been with publishers. So also a full disclosure, I help American Reading Company. I'm not an employee of American Reading Company, but I also help other publishers. I probably have helped every major publisher, some way more than others, but I've helped other publishers as well. But the vast majority of my work has gone into 5 programs that I think, and American Reading Company is one of them, that I think align with the standards, are high quality, and have legitimate systematic phonics programs K to 2. So that's a little bit about me, and that's enough about me. Take a look at these for a moment. Now, as some, or maybe all of you may know, this is the research, especially the first one by Hernandez, that is behind the third grade legislation. The legislation, I think, in now 13 states or 15 states, that if you don't pass the reading test in the third grade, you don't graduate. It's very easy to get overexcited about one piece of research, but this is essentially 4 pieces of research, 3 very large ones involving over 100,000 students. So this is not one piece of research. This is a body of work showing that something is going on at the third grade level where you have a situation where students of color who are not proficient in third grade are 6 times less likely to graduate on time compared to proficient students. And then the second study was done in Chicago with a sample size of about 60,000 students, and third grade scores predicted of 8th grade scores, high school and college grades, and even college enrollment. A student's ability to read in the spring of the third grade predicts a great deal about their future. What I hope to show you in the next few slides is that statistic, that data reflects not third grade, but kindergarten, first and second grade. Third grade to some extent, of course, but more so those earlier grades. This first study in 2017 showed that in kindergarten, letter recognition and phonemic awareness were predictors of reading comprehension 10 years later in 10th grade, which is a stunning statistic, 10 years later. Now, this next study, done in 2018, is even more interesting. Some of you may be familiar with the DSA, the Developmental Spelling Assessment. And what this study did was they took these students. Well, let me back up a little. The researcher who did this, David Page, works with foundational skills around the country. And he went into the lowest performing district and in a southeastern state, and a district that I was having so much trouble that the state for a while was thinking of taking it over, and worked with the 10 lowest schools and did training on systematic phonics. And then with those teachers that were part of the training, he gave the students in the spring of third grade this assessment. The one on the left is the Developmental Spelling Assessment, DSA. These words you see are read to students and they have to spell them. They have roughly 30 seconds to spell them correctly. Their score is basically the number of words that they've spelled correctly. So if they get up to chip, but they miss shop, then their score is 3. And as you can see, the words increase in the complexity of the phonics patterns. So BED is pretty straightforward. So is HID, hid. But when you go all the way up to weightless, it's a more complex phonics pattern. Students would have to have that suffix, LESS, and they'd have to have the digraph EIGH making the A sound. The national data is that students who get up to umbrella, who get up to the 3rd, 5th, 7th, up to the 8th word, usually succeed on comprehension tests. And so David made that a benchmark, one of the 3 benchmarks I'm going to tell you about. So keep in mind, those students who got all of the words right on the first, really on up to umbrella, so really the 3rd, 5th, the first 7, they were able to do that. And then on the pseudo words, sometimes known as nonsense words, also, and these are not the exact words under DSA or Developmental Spelling Assessment. These are words that have the same phonics patterns. So instead of shop, the DSA might have had hop or flop. So it's the same phonics patterns, but not the same exact words. On the pseudo words, if you got just to the first 6, correct, that was a benchmark. That was a benchmark. So you have 2 benchmarks. Students who could spell the first 5 words on the pseudo words, they could spell ked, pid, chope, praft, and cluft, and could read the first 6 words 7 words on the left column passed that benchmark. The next thing they had to do was read this passage, which is a passage at about a 750 Lexile level, meaning it's appropriate for the end of 3rd grade, and based on most state standards, virtually all state standards, actually every state standard except Oklahoma. They did not adopt the complexity standard. You had to read this with 95 words correct per minute. So just take a look at the passage and it'll give you an idea. Those students who read 95 words correct per minute passed that benchmark. And this was the 3rd benchmark. I want to give you a moment to look at this so you can absorb what constitutes the benchmark in this really unique study. Read it with the eye of your kids, your students in the spring of 3rd grade. 95 words correct per minute. It did not assess expression or prosody. The students who passed all 3 benchmarks, 70% of them passed the 3rd grade state assessment. 70%. Of the students who did not pass the benchmarks in phonics and fluency, only about 20% passed the state assessment. Now, this was the lowest performing schools in the lowest performing district in a large southeastern state. What that means is we know that there are other parts to passing a state test. You have to read with comprehension. You have to have some vocabulary. You have to have some knowledge. You have to have the ability to connect one part of the text to another. You have to have the ability to know when you don't understand something. So all those things are important. And as you move up the grades, they become even more important, especially vocabulary and knowledge. But what was stunning about this study, which was, by the way, the first study ever done to connect ability and foundational skills to a state assessment at the 3rd grade, or really any other state assessment. What was remarkable was you have to assume that these kids did not begin as great comprehenders. They didn't have great vocabulary, probably. They didn't have great knowledge, probably. They probably had not spent a lot of time with complex text because they were in the lowest performing schools in the lowest performing district in a low performing state. But if they have the foundational skills, if they can read the words on the page and they could read them at a rate that is appropriate to the text, then they can use their God-given brain power to figure out some of the words that they might not know the meaning of and some of the references in the text that they might not have. And that's an example of the power of foundational skills. And it shows that the 3rd grade test scores are greatly influenced by the failure of foundational skills. And the best way to develop foundational skills is systematic phonics, sometimes called structured phonics. Well, this thing called systematic phonics or structured phonics, the research on it is overwhelming, almost depressing, because lots of places don't teach with systematic phonics. One is the first study there is known as the National Reading Panel in 2000. They reviewed 500 or 600 studies and picked about the best 80 from those 500 and determined that systematic phonics produced better early reading results than programs that had no phonics or programs that had phonics, but it wasn't systematic. And we're going to talk about what systematic is. The same study was done in United Kingdom, below it. Because sometimes they don't trust us here in the colonies, and essentially got the same results. Also going through hundreds of studies, systematic phonics produced better results than schools or programs that used non-systematic phonics or no phonics at all. Core knowledge early literacy pilot. 10 schools over 3 years adopted a systematic phonics program. They were compared with 10 schools that were essentially using Teachers College Reading and Writing Project that you may be familiar with. After 3 years, on every single measure of early reading, every single one, the 10 schools using the systematic phonics outscored the other 10 schools using Teachers College Reading and Writing Project, even though they'd been using that program for, at that point, close to 10 years, probably, certainly at least 5, where it was new to the schools using the core knowledge. IES is the Institute for Educational Science, essentially the research division of the Federal Department of Education, while we still have one. They will no longer do studies related to structured or systematic phonics because they say it's a waste. The data is in, it's proven. And there's probably hundreds of other studies showing, not probably, there are, showing the same things. So the research is overwhelming. Okay, take a look at this for a moment, then I'll go through them. Okay, systematic phonics. First of all, you have to follow a sequence. That's where the system comes from. And you start with a sequence of phonological awareness. The data on phonological awareness, the relationship between letters and sounds, the making up, what makes up a word in terms of syllables, onsets and rhymes, which is breaking up a syllable, and phonemes, which is the smallest unit of sound in a language. It begins with an extensive sequence of phonological awareness. And that's essential. And that's usually in kindergarten, but also to some extent in first grade. Then you have a clear required sequence of phonics patterns, including letter recognition, letter sound patterns, morphology. You're not just doing it as you think it's needed. You're not just dropping it in when you think it's needed, but you're following a sequence. Direct, explicit instruction in each of the above components. An instruction means lessons, games, activities, and materials, and also books that have some of the words that you've been teaching the children. That's direct, explicit instruction. Frequent and regular assessment followed by differentiation. It does no good to assess if you don't differentiate based on the results. And what I'm seeing in schools that have adopted systematic phonics, some of the 5 programs that I've been working with, those that do the assessment and have a clear, concrete, doable system for those students who failed the weekly assessment do much better than others. And that could be a tier 2 intervention. It could be using guided reading to work with those students. But the point was, you have a system, you've taught short A at the end of kindergarten, let's say, and you assess students, and those students who don't do well, you have a concrete, doable, clear system to work with them. Reading, writing, spelling, speaking, integrated. Read it, write it, say it. That words that are studied, that are read, are spoken out loud, are written, and are spelled. Read it, write it, say it. Phonics patterns taught in context and out of context. In context means the books that students read, which should be at least some books that have a good deal of the phonics patterns or the pattern, as well as the sight words that were taught. Out of context means lessons, games, puzzles, and such. It's very important that kids have books to read. In some phonics programs, they're decodables. In American Reading Company, as we'll talk about, they're not. They're trade literature, which is one of the beautiful strong points of this particular program of American Reading Company. But you have to have something that children read that has what they just learned. Because otherwise, children aren't stupid. They're short, but they're not stupid. If you teach them phonics and you give them a traditional leveled reader where you can't really use the phonics, they're going to start using it. So phonics patterns have to be taught in context, meaning the book students read, and out of context. That does not mean that's the only thing they should read, but there has to be part of their diet of texts needs to be books that have the patterns that they've been taught. Third bullet, really important. Some children, there are children who are reading in the womb. They just pick it up so fast that it's stunning. And there are some who just need more time. And there are some who need far more time. So your materials for students who need more work and students who need far more work is essential to systematic phonics. 30 to 60 minutes a day, depending on differentiation needs. Systematic phonics only has 2 flavors as far as anybody knows. So it's not Ben and Jerry's. I don't know where you get 2 flavors only anymore, maybe sometime around the turn of the 19th century. But systematic phonics only has 2 flavors, analytic and synthetic. Analytic is instruction by analogy. So students are given a pattern that they've learned as a sight word. So let's say a pattern such as round. Then they know how to pronounce and how to work with found and sound and bound and hound. Or if they're given look as a sight word, they know took and book and so forth. It's basically what it says, by analogy or analysis. Synthetic phonics teaches students the parts of words, the phonemes, and teaches them how to blend them together. So instead of round, teaching you how to read and spell bound, sound, and pound, by phonemes, you would learn the OU sound, and you would learn to blend that with the ND at the end of the word, and you may have learned ND before. So you learn how to blend sounds together. What's very important is that the research that I showed you was all very clear, the big research projects. Both analytic and synthetic phonics produce the same results as long as they are systematic. Not systematic, neither one gets the results that you want your children to have. Next, for analytic, they teach high frequency words, a lot of them, probably more than most synthetic phonics programs, because you need those words to be taught as wholes to students to then use by analogy, which is how American Reading Company does it very seamlessly. But they both still have high frequency words. Analytic phonics, the programs that I'm familiar with, use trade literature. So more likely trade literature. The American Reading Company uses trade literature. I don't think it's quite 100%, right, Gina, but very close. Is that right?
Well, it's interesting, depending on how you determine it. We did write a significant portion of the books in the lowest levels, but they are in a bay in every Barnes and Noble. So I call that trade.
Okay, when you say lowest levels, what is that exactly?
The kindergarten.
Okay. So once you're out of kindergarten, and possibly the end of kindergarten, you're basically dealing with regular trade literature.
Yes.
And those books are chosen to have the high frequency words learned by sight and the words that students learn analytically as phonics patterns. So it fits the definition of systematic phonics because it's giving students books with words that have the patterns they've learned. Perhaps not all of them, but that's not a problem. The research shows that even if it's only 50 or 60%, that still works. So in American Reading Company, you have the trade literature. In synthetic phonics, you have decodables, which have a bad reputation because for most of our history as educators, they were horrible. There are now in other programs much better decodables. So synthetic phonics would use decodables, and analytic phonics, in the case of American Reading Company, and I think others, uses trade literature. Phonemic awareness, especially in kindergarten, and if you have a pre-K, especially in pre-K, is super, super important. And in my opinion, none of these programs, including American Reading Company, do enough with phonemic awareness in kindergarten. But you can supplement that by getting a book by Marilyn Adams called Phonemic Awareness in Young Children. Mm-hmm. And that Marilyn Adams was the author of the experimental psychologist I mentioned earlier. She's one of the writers of the Foundational Skills Standards. A book is on Amazon. It's like $25 or so. It's all you need. You only need one per class, and it's excellent for phonemic awareness. I will also say about American Reading Company, they make changes. I can honestly say they make changes better than any publisher I've ever worked with.
Oh, thank you, David.
So hopefully you'll change phonemic awareness and make it a bigger deal.
We promised you we're throwing in Marilyn Adams' book with every kindergarten module.
Well, I said they make changes. You can't do better than that.
We also already copied as many excerpts from it as are legally acceptable. But yes, we're going to throw the book into the kindergarten modules for next year.
So that problem is solved. In this case,
we stop saying that we don't do enough systematic phonemic awareness then?
you now are ahead of everybody.
Awesome. Solved.
Okay, both programs support spelling. If you learn how to read phonetically in either approach, you become a better speller. Here's the big insight. Here's the big difference, I think, between the two programs. Analytic phonics is much easier for teachers to learn. Teachers do not learn systematic phonics in college. Why that is, if you're interested in why that is, ask a question at the end, because it's more sociology and history than it is language or reading or the psychology of reading. But they don't. And so you get new teachers who don't know about systematic phonics, or in many cases think it's the devil. But analytic phonics doesn't feel that way. It is much easier to learn for teachers and for kids. Synthetic phonics does provide an explicit peephole into the way language works, which I think is a good thing. And both of these things work to teach kids how to read if they're systematic. But you have to make decisions always when you're running schools and districts, which is what do I want and why? In many schools, making it easier for teachers to learn how to do systematic phonics is super important. They're both research-based. In both cases, multiple readings are essential. You don't just read the book once. You read it multiple times for different reasons. You play games with it. You read it out loud. You do buddy reading. It's that multiple reading that cements phonics patterns into long-term memory. And when you do multiple reading of a book which has the phonics patterns that you just learned, that is the single strongest thing that you can do to build foundational skills aligned with demanding standards in K and 1 and even 2. Multiple reads containing phonics patterns and other patterns that students have learned. It doesn't have to be 100%. The following do not support full phonics or don't include it at all. All right, the new basals. The basals, new and old, do have a systematic phonics program. Very simply, why? Because the basals are designed to give everything in the world so that everybody will have something they like. They don't give guidance on how much time to spend on foundational skills, on phonics patterns. They don't have either the decodables or the trade literature that teaches the words, that contains the words. Some basals provide a decodable text. As a rule, they're awful, and they're usually optional, so many schools don't even buy them. So they don't provide guidance as to how much time. They don't have text containing the phonics patterns that students have learned, and they don't build in assessment as rigorously as they should, but they build it in to some extent. Fontes and Pinnell doesn't follow a scope and sequence, so it doesn't have a phonics, it doesn't have a, it's not systematic phonics because you have to have a scope and sequence. That's the heart of it. Does it have a great deal of lessons out of context? It's all in context, but it's in context with words that follow all kinds of patterns. The Fontes and Pinnell, as it's currently structured, is about as far from systematic phonics as you can get, which is why we still have so many children. One of the major reasons why we have so many children who don't read well in this country. And if you're a big fan of Fontes and Pinnell, I hope you'll stick around and ask some questions or argue with me. Disagreement is good. College Reading and Writing Project, Units of Study. They just developed within the last year a systematic phonics program. They never had it before, and they've been around a long time. I think that speaks volumes that the country is waking up about this. So what is their systematic phonics program? Well, it has a scope and sequence, and it's fine. It has lessons, and they're quite nice. They really are quite nice. And they assess. So where does it fall short? The books are not designed to contain the phonics patterns that have been taught. And that's a big weakness. I just want to throw in one possible caveat here. It was hard to get copies of it and hard to get my head around all of it. So it's possible that they have something, but I highly doubt it. Certainly, if that's a program you're considering, you would want to look at that. Okay. So why have we not gotten it right all these years? I think one reason is some students don't need that much. Some students don't need systematic phonics. And I think a lot of teachers and educators and parents felt, well, if there are these groups of students who are doing well without it, why do I need to bring in this whole thing? Previously, most phonics programs were simply not fun. They were freaking boring. Phonics does not have to be boring. Any kind of phonic thing can be converted into a game. You can integrate movement, you can integrate games, puzzles. American Reading Company does that well, very well, in a lot of respects. And since I help other publishers, the publishers that I believe are doing it right do it as well. But in the past, that was hardly ever done. There were always creative teachers who come up with great stuff. But in the past, phonics has been BB, beyond boring. Many people felt you could only read decodables. There's no research that you have to only read decodables. And there's no research that the books that you read that contain the phonics patterns that you taught have to be 100%. None. And until recently, the decodables were also BB, beyond boring. I mean, how much time am I going to spend reading about pigs doing jigs and cats on hats? American Reading Company gets around that problem with trade literature from first grade up and in kindergarten with books that they wrote for that purpose, which are being sold at bookstores. The other programs that are good have rewritten and made good decodables that are interesting and fun. Another reason people did not pay attention to phonics is that phonics and fluency are necessary for comprehension, but they're not sufficient. And people said, well, we did a systematic phonics program, but our reading scores didn't go up. Well, once you get past, especially to third grade, you're going to have to grow vocabulary. You're going to have to grow knowledge. You're going to have to give students a chance to read grade level text. Phonics and fluency by themselves do not make grade level reading. And I think we're okay. These are ELA programs that also have a scientifically based systematic phonics program. And I commend American Reading Company that they allow me to do this, even though I'm working on their dime for this. But my goal in the last years or decades of my educational life is to get programs into the hands of classrooms that teach foundational skills on a scientific basis. People do. And they're very different. I will say American Reading Company, if you don't know it, American Reading Company of all of these pays the most attention, I think, in spirit and in work to the children who need the most help. It's just infused with that. These other programs are good and they're working, but American Reading Company devotes itself to make sure everybody can learn foundational skills through the Foundational Skills Toolkit, through the way the lessons are done, and just through the personality and flavor of the program. But there are 5 programs out there now that have foundational skills that are systematic phonics.
Well, David, I wanted to just for a minute,
Go ahead.
We had a question in the box. Is ArtCore the same curriculum as the Foundational Skills Toolkit? And you'd mentioned both. And if you don't mind, I want to just answer that quickly as you were talking about them. And thank you for the compliment on we are definitely want to distinguish ourselves that way as the ones who care most. Not that everyone doesn't, but that we are dedicated to everyone, everyone learning.
You walk the walk.
Well, when you're founded by educators, owned by educators, and run by educators, we keep each other honest. And our customers tell us all the time what we need to fix. So our core, the foundational skills toolkit, what David was describing of the idea that you need a systematic sequence. That's the sequence. For us, it's the analytic sequence of the ERLA that highlights which skills in what order. And then teachers use the ERLA to identify where children fall in that sequence, and then provide lessons for them using the small group toolkits. And all of the foundational skills lessons, the explicit instruction, the small group reading, the practice, the testing to see if they're ready to move on or not, then happens in those small groups. That works either as a supplement to other core programs, or as it is in the phonics component of our core. Our core is a full ELA curriculum, and the ERLA and ERLA toolkits, the foundational skills toolkits, are the foundational skills component of that curriculum. Karen asked, when students in middle school and high school can't read because they couldn't read on grade level at the end of grade 3, do we have to go back to foundational skills or systematic phonics to get them to read? I'm sure David has a lot to say about that. I will say one thing, which is that in my experience working with secondary students, and I've worked with students who on our ERLA system leveled at kindergarten levels as 8th graders, and we followed the same instructional sequence with them. And we had students go from, I've had students personally go from kindergarten to 2nd or 3rd grade levels in 1 year, pass their science tests, get out of life skills. So just a faster version of it. But David may have other things to say about that.
I think that American Reading Company is set up to do that, but I don't want anybody to underestimate how difficult that is. When you have 8th graders reading at a kindergarten level, they feel pretty bad about themselves. Now, American Reading Company, because of the culture of the company and the culture of the program, as I was saying earlier, it's so geared to kids who are struggling that they could do that. If you had an 8th grader reading at a 3rd grade level in any of these other programs, I don't think that would work. It's very hard. However, my wife and I are writing a book about foundational skills that will mention all of these programs, including, of course, American Reading Company, and it's got a whole chapter devoted to just that question. Do you have to teach phonics to students who are many years behind? The short answer is, it depends how far behind they are, but you can't do it the same way you would do it to a 1st or 2nd grader. Integrate it in with fluency. In other words, you have to read real texts that are at higher grade levels and integrate phonics into that. And now a book, which will be published by Learning Sciences International, that's the Marzano group, or they connected to it, and I guess it'll be published in June, will address that program generically and also describe all of these programs.
And David, we have one more question. Kim's asking, please address strengths and weaknesses of Louisa Moat's letters. It is marketed as a systematic phonics program, and is it?
No, it's not. It's systematic phonics for sure, but it's professional learning. It's not, they don't give you the curriculum. They teach how to do the curriculum, and they teach it synthetic phonics, and they teach it right. Louisa Moats is the other writer of the foundational skills standards. She clearly knows her stuff, but it's not a program. You still, well, where do I get the books? Where do I get the lessons? The teachers are pretty much on their own. So it's definitely, unless they've changed it recently.
No.
Letters, L-E-T-R-S, all uppercase, not a ELA program. It's a program of professional development. And that's a very big difference.
Yeah.
In a 3-year study evaluated by the IES, letters did 100, I don't know if it's 3 years. I'm sorry, I got that confused with CKLA, but it was 160 hours, 160 hours of professional development. And it produced no change in any measure. I think that's because maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe teachers didn't really want to do it. You know, nothing works unless teachers understand it and accept it. And I think that's one of the strengths of American Reading Company. Teachers really like it. Letters the science of letters is 100% perfect. But if teachers don't understand it, if teachers don't like it, if teachers don't value it, it's not going to work. But and also, as I said, it's a PD program unless they've done something new in the last, I would say, year or so that I'm not aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Question. Are there any other questions?
Not yet. The other thing I would say about that, David, is just to add that the science of that is fantastic. It does teach the science of from a synthetic phonics approach. So it's not necessarily going to blend well if somebody is using an analytic program. No,
it would be a mess.
This is why we have David, because he says things like that. I'm being diplomatic, and you tell the truth. It's fantastic. Have you heard about unlocking the reading code? What do you think about it?
I haven't heard about it, and like every month or so, I hear someone ask me about another program. There must be hundreds of, I call them standalone phonics programs, because I'm assuming it's not part of a core ELA program like American Reading Company or like any of these others. With American Reading Company, you can just do the foundational skills part, which you cannot do with any of the others, I don't think. So I haven't heard of it, but if it's a synthetic phonics program or an analytic phonics program, what you have to look at is, number one, does it have a scope and sequence that it follows? Number two, it has to have all those elements that are on that slide, but the special thing that it has to have is, what do the kids read? Because that's the deal breaker. If kids taught systematic phonics, whether it's analytic or synthetic, and the only thing they have to read are books that don't have some practice, give them an opportunity to work with those patterns that they learned, then it's not going to work. And if they have the old-fashioned decodables, it's better than nothing, to be honest. But why do it when there's other options now? These other programs have really good decodables, and American Reading Company uses trade literature, and both work, and both because they both provide practice in the patterns that were taught. So I wouldn't want kids to, when there was no choice, that's one thing. Like in the school that I started, we had no choice. We took decodables. There was nothing else. And they were crummy, but kids do like to learn to read, and it worked.
I found it, David, and yeah, it looks like it's definitely synthetic phonics. It has a manual, a whole bunch of out of context practice, so potentially systematic, and but it involves no books, so no transfer to related texts, as far as I can tell from my 30-second research, which could be completely inaccurate.
Well, whoever asked the question, I think you know what to look for at any rate. Anything else? Any other questions?
Is Foundations a systematic phonics program? Oh, Foundations.
Yes, Foundations is a systematic phonics program. It's developed by Wilson Learning, I think. It's Wilson something, because I spoke to Ms. Wilson. Barbara Wilson. It's definitely a systematic phonics program in every respect that I discussed, except for two things. One, there's no books to read with it. Mm-hmm. You're stuck. Number two, there's not a lot of fun stuff there. They really need to soup it up more. Little children need to move, need to have fun. And the idea that phonics can't incorporate that is just ridiculous. So it's a systematic phonics program, but It doesn't have what you need to read. So as I defined it in this presentation, it's not complete, and it's not complete, and that's why they're getting no data. I call them up and I ask for data. Can you send me data? I want to know schools that have adopted this program. I get, come visit this school in some godforsaken place that I'd have to drive 7 hours, and I don't like driving, in only one place. No. If you combined it with good decodables or pulled out trade literature that worked in the way American Reading Company and added some games, then it would work. But that's a lot of adjustments.
Mhm.
Good question, because Foundations is the most popular standalone phonics program in the country by far. I don't know why. Maybe people like the name.
Yeah, it's a good name. It also has my own son his school is using parts of it, and the teachers and I were working a lot on Tap It Out, and why Tap It Out was particularly not an effective strategy, because it asked children to start at the beginning and work across the word, which means you hit the vowels really early, and often, especially in the words they were working on, the ends were really easy and gave a lot of clues. And if you looked at the beginning and the end, it was so much faster. So
Right.
that not using what you know about all the parts of the word, whether systematic or analytic, but teaching you always to go left to right, which is not, I don't even think Foundations means to do, but I've seen a lot of struggling students who had IEPs in middle school who had internalized that Tap It Out Foundations rule potentially incorrectly. And it was a real struggle to get them to stop going left to right only.
Right. The other thing, to be fair to Foundations, they say very clearly 30 minutes for instruction and 30 other minutes for kids who need more work, need more support. And I've yet to come across a school that does more than 10 minutes. How much time did your kids' school spend on it, Gina?
Oh, I'm sure that everything my child's school is doing would with it would not be what was intended. They pick and choose what they want to teach when they're teaching Tap It Out to the same children that they might be teaching initial consonants to. So they're not using it in a systematic nature, which can happen to any program, including ours.
Right, that's true. Any other questions? These were good.
Please address Haggerty Phonemic Awareness Program.
Their phonemic awareness is very good. Their phonics has the same problem. I don't believe they've got a reader. And if they do have a reader, I can't believe it's like a quality one, like some of these new programs, or they use trade literature like American Reading Company, but they're very good on phonemic awareness, which is very important. Oh, they're good, but you get the same. Well, Marilyn Adams' book is better. The teacher might have to. I would just leave it at that. Marilyn Adams' book is better, and of course, it's like vastly less money, because you just need one per each class.
Mm-hmm. So, David, we have another question from Sean. How about Reading Mastery Signature Edition? I think it is systematic with regard to phonics, but it's very little in the way of comprehension instruction. We're moving away from it and considering Art Core, but primary teachers would like to keep Reading Mastery Signature Edition for K2. Thoughts?
Well, the problem you're going to have, Sean, is what are they reading with Reading Mastery? Unless Reading Mastery has added decent books, you're going to be reading. I think they have decodables.
Their website says they do.
They're not great. They're not like unique like some of these new ones. But you know what? If your teachers like Reading Mastery and they implement it well, those decodables will not be that exciting. But if you're gonna, did you say, Gina, they're gonna switch to American Reading Company for the rest of it, but not for foundational skills?
I think it sounds like, I'm not sure, maybe Sean would like to say more, but it sounds like maybe K2 wants to stay with Reading Mastery, maybe 3-5 is interested in Art Core. Which
Well, Reading Mastery is not a core program. It's a foundational skills program. Unless I could be, from what you got on the screen, it looks like now it's a core program.
Yeah, I am not an expert on Reading Mastery. One thing I would say, though, about that is that I do think, certainly with Art Core, going with the goers is always a place to consider. No program is right for all schools, all districts, all teachers. And if K2 likes Reading Mastery and thinks it's working, and 3-5 wants to try Art Core, that's a really nice place to split for a while and see what happens. We have definitely found that some schools implement Art Core in 3rd grade. They use the ERLA, and they are either pleasantly surprised that, or reassured that children leaving 2nd grade can all already decode, which they should be pretty much done with by the end of 2nd grade, or the ERLA highlights that the K2 kids are not necessarily all leaving 2nd grade reading on grade level in foundational skills and fluency and comprehension, in which case that's sometimes enough of a reason that K2 may rethink things.
All right. Well, I see SRA there. So not only is it a systematic phonics program, but it's probably a good systematic phonics program. So that is for sure. What you would have to look at with Reading Mastery is where are your students growing their vocabulary and growing their knowledge.
Yeah.
In Art Core, that's a huge part. There's read aloud of grade level complex text, studying topics from all around the world. Habitats and sports and society and animals, all kinds of things. I suspect you're not going to get that with Reading Mastery, but that's what I would look at. But it is a good systematic phonics program with decodables, but probably not fun books like some of these others. Yeah. It's a good question, though.
Sean had an additional comment, which is he or she, I'd like us to find one K6 program. Ed Reports does not consider RMSE a comprehensive core program.
Well, then it's not. So I believe in having one program K-6, and I believe in core programs, because the core programs that were on that slide that Gina's put up all grow knowledge, all grow vocabulary, all include complex text. So I wouldn't recommend that split then, because if Ed Reports says it's not core, not that Ed Reports is perfect, but they know what a core program is and what's not a core program. And if they say it's not core, then it's not core. So I would think, Sean, about looking into American Reading Company and looking into some of these others. But you're already interested in American Reading Company. I would look carefully at the K-2.
Sean says thanks and looking forward to listening to the rest of this recording. Dismissal duty. Good luck, Sean. Ashley, would you suggest to use more phonics for the ARC program right now?
Not use more phonics for the ARC program now? Well, I think I may be misinterpreting the question. Ashley could chime in, but it's got a full phonics program. I don't think you need to add any, well, you needed to add, well, they added for you, phonemic awareness in young children, but I don't think anything else needs to be added. I absolutely think it's all there.
One thing I think that sometimes when people are using ARC, and they may not have realized that if they use, that the ERLA shows you which things a child needs next, that is their phonics, the next phonics goal, and that ties directly to lessons in the toolkit. And sometimes that connection and making sure the toolkit lessons are happening is the shoring up of phonics that some implementations need.
That sounds smart. These are good questions.
Yeah. Says no more questions, David, and I think you have one slide on the danger. Ashley says, okay, thank you. One slide on the danger of other common approaches.
Well, it's really all encapsulated in the last one. None of these are systematic. You're doing it yourself, and that's very hard. you know, where are you going to get your scope and sequence from? Where are you going to get your books for students to read? It's kind of like you can get some cool lessons in Pinterest and in Teachers Pay Teachers. But the research is that unless it's systematic, it doesn't work for the number of children that we want it to work for. So that's the danger with these other programs. They're not programs, with these other avenues to get materials.
I think this is your restatement of our central message here.
Yep, I don't think I can say it any better. I hope that got across. It's kind of sad that the kids that we lose in the first 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. And David has his email address here on the screen. He really is serious that anybody can email him and ask him questions.
I'm writing a book now, which is the hardest and most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. So anytime an email comes up that's interesting, I immediately stop and answer it.
Oh, I know that feeling. All right, David, it's 4:32, so I want to say to respect your time and others, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to all the participants and all the questions. It made for a really rich discussion. We will be sharing this PowerPoint and the recording with everybody who attended today. And if you have more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to David or also to us at American Reading Company. So thank you very much and have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.